Dr. Juliette Wu, New York City, New York, May 3, 2018. Dr. Juliette Wu gripped the armchairs tightly with both hands, so much so that her perfectly manicured nails dug into the seat cushions. She hated flying when the weather was awful, which it was right now. She landed 20 minutes ago in a government jet at LaGuardia Airport after flying in from Atlanta. Once on the ground, she was back in the air moments later, riding in a National Guard helicopter to take her to Liberty Island. A trusted colleague, Dr. Amy Coolidge, was with her, who was not nearly as bothered as she. Dr. Coolidge read through the report prepared for them on a tablet, going over the last bit of information uploaded to the CDC server moments ago. Without looking up from her tablet, Dr. Coolidge said, "The gas has completely dissipated around the island. There is some residue left inside the monument, so I wouldn't go around touching things until the cleaning crew is finished." Wu did not reply. She looked out the window as the chopper did a flyover of the island. She saw dozens of police boats on the water, blocking off access to the Hudson River as they formed a perimeter that stopped any civilian craft from getting near the scene. Along the New Jersey shoreline stood thousands of people. This was as close as anyone could get. How could we have allowed this to happen again? Wu asked herself. If only those bastards in Washington had listened to me, all of this could have been prevented. Of course, Dr. Wu wasn't sure she could have prevented the attack on Liberty Island, but she had to believe that things might have turned out differently if she had had her way. She worked for the Center of Disease Control for much of her professional life, specializing in advanced biological and chemical weapons and warfare. Such tools had become the preferred means of terror for extremist groups and rogue nations since the Soviet Union's fall. For the past 30 years, cities worldwide have been attacked using the stockpiles from the Cold War. Every agent known to man had been mislabeled, sold, stolen, or smuggled to the four corners of the globe after the fall. But no attack had ever happened on American soil. Most believed we were safe from such heinous acts of violence and our borders too well protected for such weapons to be smuggled in. Yet, as her helicopter circled the symbol of freedom, terrorism had reached home and struck a deadly blow. How unimaginative we are, she thought. She had been the lone voice screaming in a hurricane of doubt and mistrust. She advocated for a new agency to be formed, one that would be better prepared to handle such a situation. She knew police were not ready for such an attack, and that the military was too much of a blunt instrument. Something else was needed. An agency that could combine the Army's brute force with the CDC's brains. But she was laughed out of every congressional hearing she argued her case to. Unnecessary expenses, a waste of resources, and an over-aggressive response to a problem that does not exist, were the remarks she was often told. Who was laughing? Thousands were dead, and the whole world watched it happen on social media. "Dr. Wu," the pilot called out. "We've been cleared to land." "Thank you," she replied. Wu took a deep breath as the chopper rocked, as it hit a rough patch of air. It was raining outside, with flashes of lightning streaking through the sky a few miles outside the city. If the chopper didn't land soon, she was afraid she might throw open the hatch and leap outside any moment now. "Doctor," Coolidge said as she held out her tablet for Wu to take, "you should have a look at this." Wu took the tablet and saw a video file was loaded on the screen. Its watermark indicated it was from 2 days ago, just minutes before the early morning attack. It would appear hackers broke through the NSA firewall again and uploaded the video on the net. "We're trying to take it down, but it already has 15 million views in the past 30 minutes, Coolidge said. Wu knew it was to be expected. People around the world wanted answers. The attack happened live, with billions watching, as thousands of innocent people were murdered in cold blood. The government shut down the feed as quickly as possible, but more and more videos had been popping up online ever since. Another failure of just how unprepared the country was for such an event as this, Wu noted. Wu played the video. It showed a young woman who was being filmed by a man, probably her husband. The girl was smiling as she acted like she was giving a grand tour of the island. They were standing near the statue, with the camera panning up before focusing on her. Wu noted that she appeared to be in her late 20s, was attractive, with blonde hair, and spoke with a French accent. "Paige and Axel Couture," Dr. Coolidge said, as Wu watched the video. She picked up another tablet and was reading through the files of the victims. French nationals. Husband and wife. Last month, she was hired by a major law firm in the city. They'd only just moved to New York last week. Wu did not say anything. She just watched the video, noting that the couple seemed very happy and excited to be in a new city to start a brand new life together. Wu watched as Paige continued to speak to her parents, when a series of pops were heard in the distance. He panned behind him, but nothing could be seen just yet. Wu noticed that he was not the only one startled by the noise. Many of the tourists had also turned their attention to where the sounds were coming from. More pops echoed as it was starting to dawn on people what the sounds were. Panic filled the air as a mass of people began running into the flame, racing away from the sounds that grew in ferocity, until it was clear to everyone it was not firecrackers, but a gunfight. A mass of people collided with Axel, knocking his phone from his hands. Before it was picked up again, it continued to record as explosions could be heard in the distance. Axel and Paige then ran into Fort Wood, the old military fortress that was the base for the Statue of Liberty. There was more shooting. Only this time, it wasn't coming from outside, but inside the fort. People began screaming at what sounded like an automatic weapon unloaded into them. For a brief moment, as Paige and Axel ran, Wu saw the gunmen, two individuals wearing ski masks, fire into the fleeing crowd. Axel must have been struck as the phone fell and the video cracked. Wu could hear Paige screaming as the video continued streaming for a few more seconds before it stopped. The phone probably crushed from the stampede. It was the same thing Wu had seen a dozen times over already. People filmed their first visit to Liberty Island before the attack, and hundreds more started when the assault began. Each one showed the same story from different perspectives. Wu had never seen anything quite like it. The attackers were well prepared, and some managed to smuggle in enough weapons to overwhelm the park rangers in a matter of minutes, all the while planning this operation without the knowledge of the FBI or CIA. This was an embarrassment of colossal proportions. Wu knew that heads were going to roll for this, and rightfully so. As much as she hated to think about it, this event opened a door for her proposal. They all would have to listen to her. Wu looked out the window one last time as it made its final pass around the island, before it would come down on land. She saw that a boat was docked at the northwest end of the island. Federal officers poured over it, as the second group of terrorists used the vessel, came ashore moments after the first attack. These men were heavily armed, with additional weapons, ammo, and body armor for their comrades who were already wreaking havoc. They were prepared for war when the police eventually stormed the island. But unknown at the time, these men also brought a dozen oil drums filled with nerve gas containers. The chopper touched down. Before the doors were pulled open, Dr. Wu and Coolidge sealed their helmets not to be accidentally exposed. As her colleague had already said, most of the gas had dissipated with the help of the rain. Otherwise, there was a risk the wind might have carried it to New Jersey, Brooklyn, or Manhattan. "Dr. Wu!" an Army officer said as he ran up to greet her. "I'm Colonel Williams. I'm glad you could get here so quickly." "As am I, Colonel. What is the situation?" Wu asked. She and Coolidge walked with the officer as they headed towards the statue. "Our people are washing down everything, as you can see." Wu looked over and saw personnel armed with hoses spraying every building, object, and blade of grass. Even though the rain had likely washed away most of the gas, they needed to make sure the entire site was decontaminated before forensic teams could come to the island. Because of that, bodies that had been dead for 3 days still lay where they fell. Wu tried as best she could not to focus on the carnage, as the ground was littered with corpses. The sight of so many made her stomach churn as the terrorist killed without discrimination. There were more bodies as well, newer. These consisted of police and federal agents sent to retake the island. The attackers had waited until hundreds of government agents were on the island before revealing their motive for coming here. "Do you have an accurate count of the dead, Colonel?" Wu asked. "Maybe 200 killed when the attack began. Another 20 or so were executed afterward, and..." He paused for a moment, barely able to comprehend the numbers. "Over 3,000 when the gas was detonated, including every man sent to retake the island from these bastards." As they reached the statue's main entrance, the colonel stood before Wu and Coolidge before ordering his men to open the doors. "You should be warned before going inside. As bad as it is out here, it's nothing like what is in there." "I understand," Wu said with a bit of hesitation. As the doors were opened, Wu was greeted with an incredible sight. Hundreds of bodies lay on top of one another. The gas was designed to target the nervous system, and as such, the victims were all bent and twisted. They would have convulsed so horribly that every bone in their arms, legs, and back snapped before death took them. Worse, each dead body had their eyes and mouths open, which were bulging, frozen in time in agonizing pain, before death mercifully took them. I'm sorry, Doctor. I can't, Coolidge said as she fell back against the doorframe. She was about to throw up inside her suit. She fought back the urge nonetheless. It's okay. Take her outside, please, Wu said. She isn't the first one to react like that. I've had hardened veterans who've seen shit you wouldn't believe keel over. If you need a moment as well, I understand. I'll be fine, Colonel, Wu said. Colonel Williams continued to show Wu around. She could see she was in the pavilion where most of the hostages had been kept. It was from here that 20 people were executed when their unreasonable demands weren't met. The park staff was brought up and kept with the survivors, filling the cafeteria and gift shops when the pavilion filled up. At the time, no one saw the gas canisters the terrorists brought ashore. Wu knelt and examined one canister. It looked innocuous, a tall metal cylinder that could have been an oxygen tank. Wu knew otherwise. The VX gas had gone missing from the Soviet stockpile decades ago, before passed around the black market for years, until finally making its way to the US. It was then smuggled in oil drums, bought by ultra-nationalist extremist group who planned to spread their message globally. Wu recalled their demands over the past 48 hours. It included the president's removal, all federal prisoners' release, and a new constitution drafted. When their demands were not met, they executed a hostage. It was all a ploy to lure government forces to the island. A strike team was quickly assembled. The NYPD and federal SWAT teams were readied. Along with military help, a 3-stage attack followed as the combined forces hit the island from sea and air. The terrorists were quickly overwhelmed and gunned down as the island was retaken in the opening minutes. Of course, the real fight would always be for the statue, but then it happened. Once the strike teams were firmly on the island, the terrorists activated their real agenda. The VX was hidden and off everyone's radar. Placed around the island and within the same area, the hostages were held. Once the police began their final push to take the statue, the gas was detonated. Everyone died. Terrorists, civilians, and law enforcement alike. The mission had always been one way for the attackers, with their message sent and heard. Can the bodies be moved? Wu asked. It's going to be a while. Not all the canisters detonated, so it will have to be cleared. And then there's the matter of decontaminating the bodies and all the forensic work, not to mention... Wu held up her hand, wishing for the Colonel to stop talking. I understand. Thank you, Colonel. I would appreciate a moment alone. I understand. Wu walked around for a bit. She wanted to burn everything she saw into her mind, so she would never forget. She had to believe this could have been prevented, and all these lives saved. These people weren't just numbers. They had lives and dreams, friends and families. They represented the absolute best of us, as well as the worst. Wu saw a face she recognized. Kneeling next to the body, she saw the woman in front of her was Paige. She survived the opening assault and had become one of the thousands of hostages. She was dead, broken and twisted like everyone around her, having died in agony when the gas was released. I'll make them listen. I swear it. Wu promised Paige. Washington, D.C., U.S. congressional hearing. 72 hours later, 14 Congress members sat in silence as they watched footage as the attack unfolded. All of it is taken from body cameras. More than a few of them were visibly shaken from what they observed as federal agents conducted their raid to free the hostages. As Dr. Wu had seen with her own eyes, once the strike force was deep enough into the trap, the chemical weapons hidden across the island detonated simultaneously. It didn't matter where they were, as the chemical used was absorbed through the skin, resulting in a horrific death in under 4 minutes. Wu had seen enough, as she purposefully did not turn her gaze to the large TV monitors in the chambers, but instead collected her next series of notes highlighting what she would say once the video stopped. Another 15 minutes went by as the congressman watched the after-action report as Wu and the CDC team sent to Liberty Island recorded the aftermath. This caused even the most hardened politicians in the room to break down when they saw the cost of human lives. However, when the recording stopped, the room's lights brightened, allowing Wu to continue as the members collected their thoughts and wiped their eyes. 4,567 dead. Women, children, men, and the old. Park rangers, Liberty Island staff, and over 500 police and federal agents sent to rescue these poor people are among the dead. Including among this death toll is 14 terrorists, Wu said. The TV switched to photos of the suspected terrorists that showed their living images alongside their corpses. All of them suspected domestic terrorists, and all followers of the Roger Crow movement. Yesterday, federal agents raided the Crow compound in Montana, killing 6 members and arresting 18 others, with 2 of our agents were killed in action. We found these in the compound as we conducted our search. Wu indicated a stockpile of canisters laid out, the same type used on Liberty Island. Each of these canisters, 16 in all, held enough VX gas to kill every living being in a 2-mile radius. We believe the VX gas was smuggled into the country from Eastern Europe among the massive stockpiles of chemical, biological, and viral weapons lost and unaccounted for over the past 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union. We have evidence that the Crow movement was planning another attack if we didn't hit them when we did. Wu paused as she allowed her words to sink in. She knew that each of the congressmen had already been briefed on the notes she read. This was nothing more than a formality to set the stage for her real reason for meeting with them this morning. The deaths of all these people on Liberty Island is our fault, she said. Her blunt words struck home for several Congress members that looked as if they were about to speak in some foolish attempt to divert the blame from what happened away from themselves. But Wu did not allow them. I have stood before this committee on 5 separate occasions over the past 6 years, urging you to wake up and realize that our old ways of protecting this country and its citizens are archaic. The boys we sent in to save those hostages weren't prepared for the type of war that Roger Crow and his movement were fighting. The same kind of biological war that has been raging across the world for the past 30 years. We thought after Moscow in 1999, it couldn't happen here. We thought after Tokyo in 2002, it couldn't happen here. We thought after Rio de Janeiro, 2009, it couldn't happen here. Well, guess what? It has! Wu's words were like knives, stinging to the core of the congressional members who listened. Many of them not liking what they were hearing, but would not dare to open their mouths to say otherwise. The CDC is too weak and can only act passively against such threats. The military and federal law enforcement is a blunt instrument, lacking the finite tools to carry out precision operations that would have saved 4,500 American lives. Wu stood from behind her desk and approached the members. She felt like she was an actor who gave the performance of her life, addressing the audience as the play reached its grand climax. She had them right where she wanted them. My proposal for a new federal agency with the mandate to fight extreme threats that bombs, guns, and fighter planes can't destroy. The Center for Epidemic Research and Control is the scalpel our country needs to ensure that what happened in New York City never happens again. She went over the organization of the CERC, which would combine civilian and military assets into one proactive force, designed from the ground up to fight what she believed was the new frontier of warfare. When she had said all there was to say, and answered every question, Wu stood outside the chambers waiting to hear their decision. She had fought harder than she had ever in her life for something this important to her. She could not imagine another word she could say that might sway them to her side. Dr. Wu, the committee is calling you back, a Capitol police officer said. Taking a deep breath, Wu stood from her seat and re-entered the chambers, taking her place behind a long wooden desk and waited for the chairman to say what he was going to say. Dr. Wu, the congressman from Colorado began. Your service with the CDC has been extraordinary and upstanding that I believe I speak for all of us in this room today, are blessed to have such a capable and intelligent woman serving our country. Flattery, sigh, Wu thought. Your proposal for the CERC is very in-depth and would appear on paper cost-effective if what you believe to be true that New York is only the first battlefield in a new era of warfare. But some of my colleagues question the need for another federal agency. What happened in New York is tragic beyond measure, but there is a question, If this was a one-time event, or a continuing pattern of terrorist attacks using such weapons as the VX gas against Americans. Wu breathed as she had been holding her breath the entire time. She could see more than a few eyes roll. Still, she had won over enough of them, even if they only supported her now, to save face and make it seem to the American people that action was being taken. It did not matter anyway. Wu had fought for the CERC and would have continued to fight for its creation, even if the Liberty Island attack never happened. At least now, there was a drive to see it formed. This committee approves your request and will draft for funding the bill for the creation of the CERC, with the President expected to sign it within a month. Thank you for your time, Doctor. This panel is concluded. That was fast, Wu thought. She expected it would take up to a year for the CERC to be signed into existence. But the people were demanding action, something new that they could get behind that would make them feel a little bit safer. As Wu left the room, she felt like she could fly. She wanted to hold on to this moment for as long as she could. In the coming months and even years, she knew the CERC would be tested to its limits. She had her enemies in Washington that did not want to see her agency formed, and some of them sat on that committee. She could not fail. She would not fail.